What if a simple act of kindness, a single meal bought with a handful of crumpled tip money, could change your life forever? For Sarah, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in debt. It was just another Tuesday. She saw an elderly dishwasher, his hands raw and his eyes full of a quiet sorrow, about to eat nothing for lunch. She couldn't let that happen. What she did next, a small gesture she thought no one noticed, set in motion a chain of events so unbelievable it defies logic. Hours later, the thundering sound of a helicopter wasn't a movie scene. It was a billionaire moved by her secret act of compassion, sending a message that would echo through her life and expose a story of love, loss, and redemption that had been hidden for decades. The clatter of porcelain on steel was the metronome of Sarah Jenkins's life. It was a frantic, unceasing rhythm that dictated the pace of her steps, the speed of her thoughts, and the ache that settled deep in the arches of her feet. Aurelia, the restaurant that employed her, was a temple of modern gastronomy in the heart of downtown Chicago. Its patrons wore their wealth like a second skin. Their conversations a low, confident hum beneath the soaring ceilings and the soft glow of artisanal light fixtures. They spoke of mergers and Monaco, of summering in the Hamptons, and the thread count of their bed linens. Sarah spoke of Table 12's allergies and Table 7's need for more bread. At 24, she felt an eternity away from the girl who had arrived in the city with a fine arts degree and a portfolio full of charcoal sketches. The dream then was of gallery openings and critical acclaim. The reality now was the scent of truffle oil clinging to her uniform and a mountain of student loan debt that felt like a physical weight on her shoulders. Every shift was a frantic scramble for tips, a mental calculus of smiles, upsells, and feigned familiarity. Each dollar was a tiny chip off that mountain, a single grain of sand against a monolithic cliff face. Her world was divided into two distinct zones, the gilded cage of the dining room and the chaotic, steaming inferno of the kitchen. It was in the narrow corridor that connected these two worlds that she often saw him. His name was Javier Morales. He was a man who seemed to have been carved from old weathered wood, his face a road map of a life lived hard. He was 60, maybe older, with a stoop in his shoulders that wasn't just from age, but from the endless hours spent bent over the industrial-sized sink. His hands were the most shocking part of him. They were perpetually red-chapped and swollen, the skin broken in places from the constant exposure to scalding water and harsh chemicals. They were the hands of a man locked in a Sisyphean battle against the grease and grime of other people's luxury. Javier was the head dishwasher, a title that felt both grand and absurd. He was the king of a forgotten kingdom, a ghost in the machine of Aurelia's culinary excellence. He rarely spoke, communicating mostly through weary nods and the occasional fleeting smile that never quite reached his tired brown eyes. The younger kitchen staff, a boisterous crew of aspiring chefs and line cooks, mostly left him alone, their youthful energy a stark contrast to his silent endurance. Sarah, however, couldn't ignore him. In his quiet dignity, she saw a reflection of her own father, a man who had worked himself into an early grave at a factory, his hands bearing similar scars of sacrifice. She made a point to greet Javier every day, a cheerful hello Javier that was often met with just a slight upward tilt of his head. Still, she persisted. It felt important somehow to acknowledge the man everyone else looked through. This particular Tuesday was especially brutal. A major convention was in town, and Aurelia was slammed. The kitchen was a pressure cooker of shouted orders, sizzling pans, and the guttural roar of the exhaust hoods. Sarah moved like a blur, a ballet of efficiency and grace, her smile stretched thin, but holding steady. By 2:30 p.m., when the lunch rush finally began to ebb, a bone-deep weariness had set in. She had cleared over 20 tables, refilled countless glasses of water, and absorbed the condescending tone of a hedge fund manager who had complained that his steak cooked medium rare as requested was psychologically underdone. Her tips for the shift so far were a crumpled collection of bills tucked into her apron pocket, 2 20s, a 10, 3 fissamoles, and a sad assortment of ones. $79. After her tip out to the busboys and the bartender, she'd be lucky to clear $50 for 5 hours of non-stop, back-breaking, soul-crushing work. It was barely a scratch on her monthly loan payment. She retreated to the staff break area, a cramped, windowless room in the basement that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. She was about to unwrap her sad-looking sandwich turkey and wilted lettuce on store-brand bread when she remembered she'd left her water bottle in the kitchen. Trudging back up the concrete stairs, she pushed through the swinging doors into the relative quiet of the post-rush kitchen. The line cooks were wiping down their stations, their earlier frenzy replaced by a languid exhaustion. And there by the dish pit was Javier. He was sitting on an overturned milk crate, his back against the grimy tile wall. In his lap he held a single, dry piece of bread. He was tearing off small pieces and eating them slowly, methodically, as if trying to make the meager meal last. He hadn't gotten a proper break, Sarah realized. The deluge of plates had been so relentless that he hadn't had a moment to step away. He was eating the leftover bread from a table's basket, the kind they were supposed to throw out. Something inside Sarah cracked. It was the injustice of it all. The sheer staggering unfairness. In the dining room, people had just spent thousands of dollars on food they barely touched. A woman at table 9 had sent back a $60 lobster risotto because it had too much lobster. And here was Javier, the man who cleaned up their mess, eating discarded bread. The sight erased her own fatigue, her own financial anxieties. Her problems seemed trivial in that moment. Without a second thought, she turned around and walked straight out of the kitchen, past the break room, and up the stairs to the main entrance of Aurelia. She didn't stop until she was outside on the bustling Chicago street. 2 doors down was a small, family-owned deli Gino's that made sandwiches the size of a forearm. The smell of roasted meats and fresh bread was a siren song. Sarah walked in the bell above the door, chiming her arrival. "The usual, Sarah?" asked Maria Gino's wife, a kindly woman with flour dusting her apron. "Not today, Maria," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. She scanned the menu board, her mind working quickly. She wanted to get him something hearty, something that would feel like a real meal, a feast. "I'll have the Godfather," she said. It was the deli's most expensive sandwich, piled high with prosciutto, mortadella, capicola salami, and provolone drizzled with olive oil and vinegar on a crusty Italian roll, and a large chicken noodle soup, the really hot kind, and a large Coke with lots of ice. "Big lunch today," Maria said with a smile. "It's not for me," Sarah replied, pulling the crumpled bills from her apron. She flattened them out on the counter. The total came to $28.50. More than half of what she had earned so far. It was a significant chunk of her rent money, her grocery money, her everything money. For a fleeting second, a wave of panic washed over her. It was an irresponsible, foolish thing to do. But then she pictured Javier again, sitting on that milk crate with his piece of dry bread. The panic subsided, replaced by a quiet resolve. She handed the money to Maria. Carrying the heavy bag, the warmth of the soup seeping through the paper, she felt a strange sense of lightness, She slipped back into the restaurant, avoiding the eyes of her manager, Gregory Adler, a man whose ambition was matched only by his profound lack of empathy. She went straight to the kitchen. Javier was still there on his crate, though the bread was gone. He looked up as she approached, his expression one of mild surprise. "Hi, Javier," she said softly, crouching down to his level. "I noticed you didn't get a chance to have lunch. I was at the deli next door and I ordered too much. I was wondering if you'd help me out with it. I'd hate for it to go to waste." It was a clumsy lie, but it was the best she could do. She didn't want to embarrass him to make it seem like charity. She held out the bag. Javier stared at her, then at the bag, then back at her. His eyes, usually so clouded with weariness, seemed to clear for a moment. He saw the Gino's Deli logo. He knew what their sandwiches cost. He knew what a waitress made in tips. He saw the lie, but he also saw the truth behind it. He slowly, hesitantly reached out his raw red hand and took the bag. He opened it, and the aroma of the soup and the fresh, cold cuts filled the small space around them. For a long moment, he just looked at the food. A tremor went through his hand. He looked up at Sarah, and his eyes were glistening. Two words, thick with an accent she couldn't quite place, and heavy with emotion, escaped his lips. "Thank you," he whispered. It was more than she had ever heard him say at one time. "You're welcome, Javier," she said, her own throat tightening. "Enjoy it." She gave him a small, genuine smile and turned to leave before he could see the tears welling up in her own eyes. As she pushed through the kitchen doors, she didn't see the figure standing in the shadows of the dry storage area, a man who had witnessed the entire quiet exchange. She didn't know that her simple act of kindness, born of a moment's empathy, had not gone unnoticed after all. She just went back to work her pocket lighter, but her spirit somehow immeasurably fuller. The man who watched from the shadows of the dry storage was a fixture at Aurelia, as much a part of the restaurant as the polished mahogany bar or the oversized abstract painting in the foyer. The staff knew him only as Mr. Beaumont. He was table 40, the secluded corner booth in the back of the dining room, and he requested it every Tuesday and Thursday for lunch without fail. His reservation was permanent, held for him whether he showed up or not. But he always showed up. He would arrive precisely at 100 p.m., dressed in an impeccably tailored but unassuming suit of charcoal grey or navy blue. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a high forehead and eyes the colour of a stormy sea. He never came with guests. He never took a phone call. He would simply sit, order the seared scallops and a glass of iced tea, and read a hardcover book he brought with him. He was a creature of habit and an enigma. The staff's speculation about him was a constant source of gossip. Some thought he was a retired spy, others a reclusive author or a disgraced academic. Tiffany Stone, a fellow waitress who viewed Sarah as her primary rival for the best sections, was convinced he was an old money eccentric with a dark secret. "He's got to be hiding something," Tiffany would say, leaning against the server station, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Nobody is that quiet or that rich. Did you see his watch? That's a Patek Philippe. That's more than my car. Hell, that's more than my student loans." Sarah, on the other hand, found his presence calming. He was the one customer who never seemed to need anything. He was polite, distant, and tipped exactly 30% to the penny every single time. Serving him was like a small, predictable oasis in the chaotic desert of her shift. She would take his order, deliver his food, refresh his iced tea once, and leave him to his book. He would acknowledge her with a slight formal nod, his gaze rarely lifting from the page. On this particular Tuesday, Mr. Beaumont had deviated from his routine. He had finished his scallops early, and instead of leaving had requested a tour of the kitchen from the manager Gregory. It was an unusual request, but one Gregory was all too happy to grant for a patron of Mr. Beaumont's apparent stature. Gregory, a man who slicked his hair back a little too tightly and wore suits that were a size too small, saw Mr. Beaumont as a walking, talking status symbol. Pleasing him was paramount. "Of course, Mr. Beaumont, right it this way," Gregory had boomed, leading him through the swinging doors with a flourish. "We pride ourselves on a state-of-the-art facility, the heart of our operation." Mr. Beaumont had walked through the gleaming stainless steel labyrinth, his expression unreadable. He observed the flurry of the lunch rush, the focused intensity of the chefs, the organized chaos of it all. His tour had concluded near the dish pit, and he had lingered asking Gregory a few pointed questions about the water temperature and the sanitation process. Gregory, eager to impress, had answered in excruciating detail. It was during this conversation that Mr. Beaumont had stepped back, melting into the alcove of the dry storage pantry, ostensibly to stay out of the way of the bustling staff. Gregory, seeing his VIP guest was content to observe, had been called away to deal with the complaint about the psychologically underdone steak, and so from that vantage point, Mr. Beaumont had seen it all. He saw Sarah, her face etched with a familiar end-of-shift weariness. He saw Javier, the old dishwasher, huddled on a milk crate, the picture of quiet desperation. He saw the piece of dry bread. He then witnessed Sarah's abrupt departure and her swift return with the fragrant bag from Gino's deli. He heard her gentle, face-saving lie. And he saw the look in Javier's eyes, a look of profound, heart-wrenching gratitude. He saw the flicker of moisture in the old man's eyes, a sight that caused an almost imperceptible tightening in Mr. Beaumont's own jaw. He remained in the shadows until Sarah had left the kitchen. He watched as Javier reverently set up his meal, carefully opening the soup to let the steam warm his face before unwrapping the magnificent sandwich. It was a sacred ritual, a feast for a king who had forgotten what a feast was. Mr. Beaumont stepped out of the alcove, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the grease-slicked floor. He walked back into the dining room, his composure as immaculate as ever. He bypassed his own table and went straight to the front host stand, where Gregory was now placating another disgruntled customer. "Mr. Adler," he said, his voice low, but carrying an unmistakable authority that cut through Gregory's obsequious chatter. "Mr. Beaumont." "Yes, is everything all right? I hope your observation of our little beehive was satisfactory," Gregory said, turning his full attention to the man he considered his most important customer. "Everything was most illuminating," Mr. Beaumont replied, his eyes cool and penetrating. "I have a question for you. The young waitress, the blonde with the ponytail. What is her name?" Gregory blinked. "Our wait staff." "Yes, let me see. Blonde ponytail. Ah, you must mean Sarah. Sarah Jenkins." "Sarah Jenkins." Mr. Beaumont repeated the name, tasting foreign on his tongue. "And the man who runs the dishwasher." "The older gentleman." Gregory's face soured slightly, a flicker of distaste crossing his features. "Oh, him. That's Javier. Just Javier. I'm not even sure of his last name, to be honest. Been here for years. Reliable, I suppose, for what he does." The dismissal in his tone was palpable. Javier was a cog, a piece of equipment, not a person worth knowing. "I see," Mr. Beaumont said. He reached into his jacket and produced a slim, elegant wallet. He extracted his credit card. "I'll be settling my bill now." "Of course, Mr. Beaumont. I'll just bring it to your table," Gregory offered. "That won't be necessary. I'll take care of it here." As Gregory ran the card, Mr. Beaumont's gaze drifted across the dining room, landing on Sarah as she deftly cleared a table, stacking plates with an efficiency born of long practice. Her face was set in a neutral mask of professional courtesy, but he had seen behind it. He had seen the flash of genuine compassion that had cost her more than half her day's wages. "Here you are, Mr. Beaumont," Gregory said, handing back the card and the receipt. "And please do let me know if there's anything else at all I can do for you." Mr. Beaumont took the receipt, but didn't sign it yet. He looked directly at Gregory, his stormy eyes seeming to peer into the manager's shallow soul. "Tell me, Mr. Adler," he began, his voice dropping even lower. "What is your policy on staff meals?" The question caught Gregory off guard. Staff meals. Well, employees receive a 50% discount on select menu items. They are to be consumed only during designated break times in the staff area. He recited the rule from the employee handbook as if it were scripture. "And is a piece of discarded bread considered a select menu item?" Mr. Beaumont asked, his voice laced with ice. Gregory's face went pale. He had no idea what Mr. Beaumont was talking about, but the tone of the question sent a chill down his spine. I'm not sure I understand, sir." Mr. Beaumont held his gaze for a moment longer before giving a slight shake of his head. "No," he said almost to himself. "I don't suppose you do." Without another word, he scribbled a signature on the receipt, added his customary 30% tip, and turned to leave. Gregory, flustered and confused, watched him go. He glanced down at the signed receipt and then did a double take. On the tip line, Mr. Beaumont had tipped his usual amount, but on the total line, he had added 2 zeros to the final sum. The bill for his $80 lunch now read as $8,000. Gregory stared at the number, his mind refusing to process it. It had to be a mistake. A slip of the pen. He looked up, ready to run after Mr. Beaumont. But the man was already gone, disappearing into the flow of pedestrian traffic on the bustling Chicago street, leaving behind only a bafflingly large number on a piece of paper and a profound sense of unease in the pit of Gregory's stomach. The manager had no way of knowing that the $8,000 was merely the prelude. The real message was yet to be delivered. The rest of Sarah's shift passed in a blur of exhaustion and gnawing anxiety. The $28.50 she had spent on Javier's lunch was a hole burning in her pocket, a constant reminder of her impulsiveness. It was noble, yes, but nobility didn't pay the electric bill. With every table she cleared, she mentally recalculated her dwindling earnings, the numbers swimming in her head. She'd have to eat ramen for the next week, maybe skip her monthly transit pass, and walk the 3 miles to work. The warmth she'd felt from her act of kindness began to cool, replaced by the chilly dread of financial reality. Tiffany Stone, ever the opportunist, seemed to smell Sarah's distress like a shark smells blood in the water. "Tough crowd today, huh, Jenkins?" Tiffany purred, gliding past her with a tray full of cocktails. "You look like you just lost your last friend. Didn't make your numbers." "I'm fine, Tiffany," Sarah muttered, refusing to give her the satisfaction. "If you say so." Tiffany sing-songed, a malicious glint in her eye. "Just a little tip, sweetie. You spend less time worrying about the kitchen trolls and more time charming the whales in the dining room, you might actually be able to afford a new pair of shoes. Those are looking a little sad. She glanced pointedly at Sarah's worn black non-slips. The comment stung precisely as intended. Sarah bit her tongue, turning her attention to polishing silverware with a ferocity that surprised even herself. She had to get through this day. It was just after 4:00 p.m. The restaurant was in the quiet lull between the lunch and dinner services, a precious 2-hour window of relative peace. The staff were resetting tables, prepping their stations, and taking their own long-delayed breaks. Sarah was in the main dining room, carefully arranging wine glasses in perfect gleaming rows. The only sounds were the soft clinking of glass, the distant hum of the vacuum in the private dining room, and the muffled street noise from beyond the heavy doors. Then a new sound began. It started as a low, deep thrumming, a vibration more felt than heard. Sarah paused, her hand hovering over a glass. It sounded like a heavy truck idling outside. But the sound grew steadily, insistently swelling from a thrum to a rhythmic, percussive whoomp, whoomp, whoomp. The floor began to vibrate. The wine glasses on her tray rattled against each other, a delicate tinkling alarm. Heads popped up from around the restaurant. The busboys stopped their work. The bartender looked up from his phone. Tiffany, who had been reapplying her lipstick at the host stand, stared out the large front windows, her jaw slack. "What in the world is that?" Gregory Adler demanded, storming out of his office, his face a mask of annoyance. The sound was immense now, a deafening, throbbing roar that seemed to be coming from directly above them. It pressed in on the building, making the very air feel thick and heavy. It was the unmistakable, earth-shaking beat of helicopter blades impossibly close. Sarah, along with everyone else, rushed to the front windows. What they saw defied all logic. Hovering over the street, not 50 feet from the front of Aurelia, was a helicopter. It wasn't a news chopper or a police aircraft. It was a sleek, black, executive-class machine, the kind of vehicle one saw in movies about spies and corporate raiders. Its make was an Augusta Westland AW109, a machine that screamed of unimaginable wealth. The downdraft from its rotors whipped at the trees lining the street, sending leaves and debris scattering. Pedestrians on the sidewalk had stopped in their tracks, their faces turned upward in a mixture of fear and astonishment, their phones held aloft to capture the unbelievable sight. Traffic had ground to a halt. "Is it going to land?" A busboy squeaked, his eyes wide. "It can't land here. This is Michigan Avenue," Gregory yelled, his voice barely audible over the roar. "What is going on? Is this some kind of insane publicity stunt?" He was already fumbling for his phone, ready to call the police, the FAA, anyone who could explain the chaos that had descended upon his obsessively controlled establishment. The helicopter didn't land. It hovered, a predatory bird of steel and carbon fiber, its presence a complete disruption of reality. As the staff of Aurelia stared mesmerized, a side door on the aircraft slid open. A figure appeared silhouetted against the grey sky. It was a man dressed not in a pilot's uniform, but in a sharp, dark suit. He was harnessed to the inside of the aircraft for safety. He held a large, sophisticated-looking tablet. Then something even more surreal happened. The helicopter was equipped with a powerful external speaker system. A voice, amplified and digitally clear, boomed out over the street, cutting through the noise of the rotors. "This is a message for Sarah Jenkins," the voice declared. "Sarah Jenkins, an employee of the Aurelia restaurant." Inside, a collective gasp went through the staff. Every head swiveled to stare at Sarah. She stood frozen, her face as white as the tablecloths she had just laid. The blood had drained from her head, leaving behind a roaring static. Her name. A man in a helicopter was saying her name. It was a dream. It had to be a nightmare. "Sarah," Tiffany whispered, her usual snark replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. "Sarah Jenkins," the amplified voice repeated as if for emphasis. "Mr. Julian Croft sends his compliments. He asks that you please come outside." The name hit Gregory Adler like a physical blow. Croft. Not Beaumont. Julian Croft. The name was instantly recognizable, though the man himself was famously reclusive. Julian Croft was a legend in the world of finance and technology, a titan of industry, a multi-billionaire who had dropped off the public radar years ago after the tragic death of his wife. He was known for his brilliant mind, his ruthless business acumen, and his almost pathological need for privacy. And he was apparently the man the staff knew as the quiet, book-reading Mr. Beaumont, the man who had left an $8,000 tip just a few hours ago. Gregory's mind reeled. Mr. Beaumont was Julian Croft, and Julian Croft had just sent a helicopter for one of his waitresses. "Jenkins, what did you do?" Gregory hissed, his face a mixture of terror and fury. He imagined 1,000 nightmare scenarios. Had she offended him? Was this some bizarre public shaming? Sarah couldn't answer. She couldn't feel her legs. The world had tilted on its axis. The man in the helicopter was beckoning to her. The entire street was now watching the front door of Aurelia, waiting for Sarah Jenkins to emerge. "Go on." Gregory shoved her lightly from behind. "Go. See what he wants, and for God's sake, don't make a scene." Her feet felt like lead blocks. She stumbled towards the door, her mind a complete blank. Pushing it open, the full force of the rotor wash hit her a powerful artificial wind that whipped her blonde ponytail across her face and flattened her apron against her. The noise was overwhelming. She shielded her eyes, taking a few hesitant steps onto the sidewalk. She was the center of a city-stopping spectacle. Hundreds of eyes were on her. Phones were recording her every move. The man in the helicopter raised the tablet he was holding. Its screen was bright visible even in the daylight. On it, in large, clear letters, was a simple message. "Your kindness did not go unnoticed." Beneath the words was a picture. It was a still frame clearly taken from a security camera or a hidden device. It was a photo of her crouching in the kitchen, handing the bag from Gino's Deli to Javier Morales. The sight of the photo broke the spell. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an accusation. It was acknowledgement. The man in the helicopter, the man she now knew, was the billionaire Julian Croft, had seen her. He had seen her buy lunch for Javier. From the helicopter's open door, the man in the suit unclipped a sleek carbon fiber briefcase from a hook. He held it up for her to see. Then with a smooth, practiced motion, he let it go. It wasn't a reckless drop. A thin, high-tensile wire unspooled from the helicopter, guiding the briefcase down with perfect precision. It landed softly, silently, right at Sarah's feet. The man in the suit gave a single sharp nod. The door slid shut. The roar of the rotors intensified as the helicopter began to ascend, rising smoothly above the rooftops of Michigan Avenue. Within a minute, it had banked and disappeared into the sprawling gray sky, leaving behind a stunned silence, broken only by the beeping of tow horns as traffic began to slowly, uncertainly move again. Sarah stood alone on the sidewalk, the wind still swirling around her. The eyes of her co-workers, of strangers of the entire city, it felt like were fixed on her. At her feet lay the briefcase. It was a simple, elegant object, But in that moment, it felt like a mysterious artifact from another world, a world that had just violently and inexplicably collided with her own. And she had no idea what was inside. The aftermath of the helicopter's departure was pure chaos contained within the elegant walls of Aurelia. Gregory Adler, his face fluctuating between shades of crimson and ghostly pale, immediately herded a still dazed Sarah back inside, snatching the briefcase from her grasp as if it were a live grenade. "My office now!" he barked, his voice tight with panic. The rest of the staff erupted in a cacophony of questions and frantic speculation. Tiffany Stone looked as though she had seen a ghost, her usual venomous expression replaced by one of slack-jawed disbelief and a burning, obvious envy. Sarah felt like she was floating her body, disconnected from the surreal events unfolding around her. She followed Gregory into his cramped office, her legs still unsteady. He slammed the door shut and placed the briefcase on his desk, with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. "Jenkins." He started pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "You are going to tell me right now what is going on. What is your relationship with Julian Croft?" "I don't have one," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. He's Mr. Beaumont. He's table 40. I serve him scallops and iced tea. That's it. I swear." "Don't lie to me," Gregory snapped, pointing a trembling finger at the briefcase. "People like Julian Croft do not send multi-million-dollar helicopters to deliver briefcases to waitresses they just serve scallops to." "What did you say to him? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Sarah insisted, her own fear giving way to a flicker of frustration. I bought Javier lunch. That's all. The picture on the tablet. That's what this is about." Gregory stopped pacing and stared at her, his mind struggling to connect the dots between a billionaire, a helicopter, and a dishwasher's lunch. The sheer absurdity of it was too much for his linear transactional worldview. You bought the dishwasher a sandwich, and the richest man in Illinois sends an aerial courier service that makes no sense. Before Sarah could respond, there was a sharp knock at the office door. Gregory threw it open to find a woman standing there. She was in her 50s, with salt and pepper hair cut in a chic no-nonsense bob. She wore a simple but exquisitely tailored navy blue dress and carried a leather portfolio. Her demeanor was one of calm, unshakable competence. "Mr. Adler," she said, her voice pleasant but firm. "My name is Annalise Romer. I am Mr. Croft's chief of staff. May I have a word with you, and Ms. Jenkins?" Gregory was momentarily speechless, utterly intimidated by her powerful presence. He could only nod and step aside to let her in. Ms. Romer entered the small office, her gaze immediately finding Sarah. She offered a warm, reassuring smile. "Sarah, it is a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Mr. Croft has been most eager to make your acquaintance in a manner of speaking." She then turned her attention to the briefcase on the desk. "I believe this is for you," she said, her eyes flicking to Gregory, who was still holding it as if it were his own. With a look that could curdle milk, she prompted him to slide it across the desk towards Sarah. "Mr. Croft prefers to be discreet," Ms. Romer continued, a hint of irony in her voice as she acknowledged the spectacle that had just occurred outside. However, in this instance he felt a certain public statement was necessary, both as a message to you and as a message to others. Her eyes met Gregory's for a brief, pointed moment. She turned back to Sarah. "Mr. Croft would like to explain things himself. He is a man of few words, and he finds writing them down is often more effective. The explanation is inside." She gestured to the briefcase. "The case is unlocked." With trembling hands, Sarah reached for the briefcase. It was surprisingly light. She laid it flat and clicked the 2 latches. She lifted the lid. The contents were simple and unexpected. There was no cash, no gold bars, no secret documents. Instead, nestled in the plush, custom-molded interior, were 2 items. The first was a single, sealed, cream-colored envelope with the name Sarah written on it in elegant cursive script. The second was an old, well-worn, leather-bound book. It was a copy of Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. Sarah stared at the book confused. Ms. Roma smiled gently. That was his wife's favorite book. Please, read the letter. Sarah picked up the envelope. The paper was thick and expensive. She broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. The text was not typed, but handwritten in the same elegant script as her name. Dear Ms. Jenkins, I must apologize for the rather dramatic method of this delivery. Forgive an old man his eccentricities. I have found in my life that grand gestures are sometimes the only way to make a point clear. My name is Julian Croft. For years you have known me as Mr. Beaumont. I come to your restaurant seeking something that is in very short supply in my world-quiet anonymity. You and the staff at Aurelia have always graciously afforded me that. But today, you afforded someone else something far more valuable, dignity. You may wonder why your simple act of kindness towards Mr. Javier Morales prompted such a response from me. The reason is a woman named Eleanor, my late wife. 45 years ago, I was not Julian Croft, the billionaire. I was Julian Croft, a scholarship student at the University of Chicago, so poor I often had to choose between buying a textbook or buying a meal. I was proud and foolish, and I told no one of my struggles. I worked as a dishwasher in a small diner in Hyde Park to make ends meet. It was grueling, thankless work. My hands were raw, my spirit was weary, and my stomach was often empty. There was a waitress there. Her name was Eleanor. She was bright and funny, and she had eyes that saw more than most people. She saw my worn-out shoes. She saw me passing on staff meals I couldn't afford, even at a discount. She saw my hunger. One day, just like today, I was sitting in the alley behind the kitchen about to eat a dry heel of bread I'd saved from the trash, and Eleanor came out with a bag. She'd bought me a huge roast beef sandwich and a slice of apple pie from the bakery down the street with her tip money. She used the same excuse you did. She said she'd ordered too much. I knew she was lying. I knew that money was probably her bus fare for the week. That sandwich, Ms. Jenkins, was the most important meal of my life. It wasn't just food. It was proof that someone saw me, that I mattered, that kindness existed in a world that felt cold and indifferent. That act of grace gave me the strength to keep going. It lit a fire in me. Eleanor and I fell in love. We married a year later. The company I would later build the fortune I would amass, it was all built on a foundation of her belief in me. It all started with a single sandwich bought with a handful of tips. Eleanor passed away 5 years ago. I lost my compass, my partner, my reason. I retreated from the world. I have spent these past years living in a quiet grey twilight, surrounded by wealth that means nothing without her to share it with. Today in your kitchen, I saw Eleanor again. I saw her compassion, her grace, her innate goodness living on in you. You didn't do it for an audience. You did it because it was the right thing to do. You saw a fellow human being struggle, and you answered it with your own sacrifice, no matter how small you may have thought it was. You reminded me of the man I was, and the woman who saved me. You woke me up from a long sleep. For that I am in your debt. What you do with the contents of this case is up to you. I hope you will see it not as a payment, but as a transference of a legacy. Eleanor's legacy of kindness. Sincerely, Julian Croft. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face as she finished the letter. She looked up at Miss Roma, who was watching her with gentle, understanding eyes. Gregory Adler stood frozen, the letter's contents having rendered him completely silent, his face a canvas of shock and dawning shame. "The book," Sarah whispered, her voice choked with emotion. It was the copy Eleanor carried with her the day she met him. Ms. Roma explained softly. "He wanted you to have it. He said Eleanor always believed in tilting at windmills." Sarah gently touched the worn leather cover of Don Quixote. This wasn't just about money. It was about a love story that spanned decades, about a grief that had hollowed out a man's soul, and about a simple act of kindness that had somehow miraculously provided a bridge back to the light. She looked inside the briefcase again. Beneath the custom molding that held the book and the letter was a false bottom. She lifted it. Underneath was not a pile of cash, but a series of official-looking documents and a single platinum credit card. The top document was a letter from a prestigious financial institution. It was addressed to Miss Sarah Jenkins. It stated that a trust fund named the Eleanor Foundation had been established in her name. The initial endowment was for $1 million. The $1 million figure hung in the air of Gregory Adler's tiny office, a number so vast and incomprehensible it seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. Sarah stared at the documents, her mind unable to process the string of zeros. $1 million. It was an abstract concept, a lottery winner's fantasy. It wasn't something that happened to waitresses who sketched charcoal drawings in their spare time and worried about their electric bills. Gregory, who had been rendered mute by the emotional weight of Croft's letter, was suddenly jolted back to life by the stark, beautiful reality of the money. His brain, which had short-circuited when faced with concepts like love and legacy, rebooted instantly at the scent of wealth. Avarice, a language he understood perfectly, flooded his system. $1 million. He breathed his eyes wide and fixed on the documents in Sarah's hands. His expression shifted from shock to something Sarah had seen many times before, the predatory, calculating look of a man about to make an aggressive sales pitch. "Sarah," he said, his voice now slick and friendly, a complete reversal of his earlier panic. This is incredible. Truly. And it's all thanks to the environment we foster here at Aurelia. An environment of service, of paying attention to the details, to our entire team. Annalise Roma arched a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Is that so, Mr. Adler?" Gregory ignored her, his focus entirely on Sarah. "Think about it. This gesture, this wonderful, wonderful gift, it's a reflection on the restaurant, on all of us. Mr. Croft is a valued patron, and his satisfaction is our top priority. The foundation he's set up, it's really a donation to the Aurelia family." Sarah looked up at him confused. "The letter said it was for me." "Well, yes, of course, in your name," Gregory said smoothly, making air quotes with his fingers. "That's how these things are done, for tax purposes. But the spirit of the gift, Sarah, the intent, it's clearly to reward the establishment that facilitated this beautiful moment. As the manager, it's my duty to oversee such a significant contribution to our brand." He was trying to take it. He was trying to co-opt her miracle, to absorb it into the restaurant's balance sheet, with himself no doubt as the primary beneficiary. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Before Sarah could even formulate a response, The office door burst open again. This time it was Tiffany Stone, her face a thunderous mask of rage and jealousy. She had clearly been listening at the door. "$1 million!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're giving her $1 million for what?" "For buying a sandwich for that old man. I give him water all the time I say hello. Why does she get everything?" She advanced on Sarah, her finger jabbing accusingly. "This is a scam. She's been playing some long con on that old man." I knew it. Flirting with him, probably telling him some sob story. She's a manipulative little gold digger. That is quite enough, don't it? "Miss," Roma said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. She took a step forward, positioning herself between Tiffany and Sarah. Though she was smaller than the enraged waitress, she radiated an authority that made Tiffany halt in her tracks. "Mr. Croft's decisions are not open for debate," Ms. Roma stated, her eyes like chips of ice. "And I will not stand here and listen to you slander Ms. Jenkins's character." Gregory, seeing his own plan being threatened by Tiffany's hysterical outburst, jumped in. "Tiffany, calm down. We'll sort this out. There's obviously been some kind of misunderstanding about the nature of this fund." He was trying to play both sides to appear in control while still angling for the money. It was in that moment that the final piece of the puzzle appeared. The office door, still ajar, was pushed open gently. Javier Morales stood there, holding his empty soup container and the wax paper from his sandwich neatly folded. He had come to throw them in the trash can in the office, the only one with a recycling bin. He stopped, his eyes taking in the scene, Sarah crying Gregory, posturing Tiffany raging, and the two strange women. He looked confused and a little frightened, like a deer that had wandered onto a highway. "Javier!" Gregory barked, seizing the opportunity to reassert his authority, and he thought to prove his point. "Perfect timing. Come in." Javier hesitated. "Come in?" "Come in," Gregory insisted, waving him over. He turned to Ms. Roma with a smug look. "You see, we're a team, a family. Javier is a key part of that family. Now, Javier, tell us, Sarah was kind to you today, wasn't she?" Javier looked at Sarah, then nodded slowly. "Si. She. Good." "Exactly," Gregory boomed. "And we are all very grateful for this wonderful gift that Mr. Croft has given the restaurant in honor of that kindness. Isn't that right? We'll all benefit. We could upgrade the dishwashing station for you. Maybe get you some new gloves." He was talking down to him, using him as a prop in his greedy little play. This was the twist. The final ugly hurdle. The very man whose dignity Sarah had sought to protect was now being used as a pawn to strip her of her own. Sarah found her voice. It was quiet, but it cut through the noise. "No," she said. All eyes turned to her. "No," she repeated, stronger this time. She stood up, wiping the tears from her face. She looked directly at Gregory, then at Tiffany. "This isn't about the restaurant. It isn't about you, and it isn't about the money. It was about seeing a good man who was hungry and helping him. That's it. You can't put a price on that, and you certainly can't claim it as a business asset." She then turned to Javier, her expression softening. "Javier," she said, her voice gentle again. "I'm so sorry you've been dragged into this." She looked back at the documents in her hand, then at the platinum credit card. The letter from the bank outlined the terms of the trust. It was to be managed by Mr. Croft's financial firm, but its directives were to be guided by her. The Eleanor Foundation was hers to control. An idea bold and terrifying sparked in her mind. It was a leap of faith, a tilt at a windmill. "Ms. Roma," Sarah said, turning to the Chief of Staff. "Mr. Croft's letter said, I get to decide what to do with this. Is that correct? Ms. Roma smiled a genuine, brilliant smile. Completely. The Foundation's charter gives you full discretionary power over its projects and disbursements, so long as they align with the core principle of furthering human kindness. Sarah took a deep breath. Okay. She walked over to Javier, who looked at her with wide, uncertain eyes. She ignored the sputtering protestations from Gregory and the venomous glare from Tiffany. Javier, she began, her voice clear and steady. What is your last name? Morales, he whispered. Javier Morales, Sarah repeated. Where are you from, Javier? He swallowed, seeming to find a piece of his voice that had been lost for years. I am from a small village near Oaxaca in Mexico, a long time ago. Were you always a dishwasher, Javier? Sarah asked gently. A shadow passed over his face, a deep, ancient sadness. No, he said, his voice cracking. In my village, I was a teacher. I taught the children to read. The confession hung in the air, a stunning revelation. Gregory Adler scoffed, a disbelieving smirk on his face, but Sarah and Ms. Roma looked at him with newfound respect. My village. Javier continued, his voice gaining a little strength, as if speaking of it brought it back to life. It was destroyed. A flood. Many years ago. My school, my home. Everything. I came here to this country with nothing. No papers, no English. The only work I could find. He gestured with his raw red hands, the words unnecessary. Sarah felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her knees. This quiet, overlooked man was a teacher. A man who had once shaped young minds was now scraping dried hollandaise sauce off plates. The injustice of it was a physical pain. She knew what she had to do. It was reckless and impulsive, just like buying the sandwich, and it felt just as right. Ms. Roma, Sarah said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. My first act as the head of the Eleanor Foundation is this. She turned to face Javier Morales. Javier, would you like to go home? Javier stared at her, uncomprehending. Home. Back to your village, or what's left of it, Sarah clarified. Mr. Croft's letter talked about a legacy of kindness. I think the best way to honor that is to correct a wrong. We are going to use this foundation to rebuild your school. We'll build a library and name it after Eleanor Croft. We'll fill it with books, and we are going to fund it and offer you the position of headmaster with a full salary for the rest of your life if you'll take it. Silence. Complete, stunned silence. Javier Morales looked at the 24-year-old waitress as if she were an angel. His face, a mask of weary resignation for so many years, began to crumble. His lips trembled, and a single large tear traced a path through the weathered lines on his cheek. He tried to speak, but only a choked sob emerged. He nodded his head, a gesture of such profound, overwhelming acceptance that it was more powerful than any words. Sarah then turned her gaze to Gregory and to Tiffany. Their faces were a perfect picture of defeat. Their greed and cynicism had been answered with a gesture of such grand, breathtaking generosity that it left them with nothing to say. Their petty schemes had evaporated in the face of true charity. As for the restaurant, Sarah said, her voice now firm and businesslike, I believe the Eleanor Foundation will be making a one-time official donation. I'm thinking $50 should cover it, to reimburse the kitchen for the piece of bread Javier ate. Ms. Roma let out a short, sharp laugh of pure delight. She looked at Sarah, her eyes shining with admiration. In that moment, she knew Julian Croft had chosen his successor well. The legacy of Eleanor was in the perfect hands. So a waitress's life was changed forever, but not just by the money. It was transformed by the realization that her small, hidden act of goodness had the power to ripple outwards, touching and healing lives she never knew were broken. Sarah Jenkins didn't just receive a gift. She became a giver. She used her newfound power not to escape her old life, but to rebuild someone else's, proving that the greatest fortune isn't what you have, but what you do with it. The story of Sarah Javier and Julian Croft reminds us that in a world that often feels cold, a single moment of warmth, of seeing the humanity in a person everyone else ignores, can set a miracle in motion. It begs the question we should all ask ourselves, who in our lives is eating dry bread while we feast? If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness is never, ever wasted. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that proves the extraordinary can be born from the most ordinary of hearts. Thank you for watching.